of sex for rent. But first, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 12 o'clock. At least 6 hospital trusts have declared critical incidents as Omicron cases threaten staff shortages. The Prime Minister says it's essential to look after the NHS, as some health leaders warn they're in a state of crisis. One of those was United Lincolnshire Hospitals NHS Trust, who say extreme and unprecedented staff shortages were expected to result in compromised care. Meanwhile, as some schools are heading back today, classes are expected to merge into large groups if staff levels, particularly teachers, dip too low. Children across England will be required to wear face masks and take a lateral flow test as they start returning to the classroom. The government says it's a priority to keep schools open. Labour's Shadow Education Minister, Bridget Phillipson, told GBNews, though, the government hasn't done enough to prepare for a surge in Omicron cases.
Before Christmas, we were saying that the government should use that break to roll out the vaccine to all eligible children. It's been a huge missed opportunity to do that. We also need to see proper ventilation in our schools. Head teachers are being told just to open the windows and put children in coats. I don't think that's good enough. And on testing, we know that many parents have experienced difficulties getting their hands on testing kits, and it's vital that we all test our children to make sure that we're kind of keeping control of the virus.
35 migrants attempting to cross the Channel to the UK have been taken to Dover by the local lifeboat this morning. More illegal vessels are also being intercepted by UK Border Force. It follows new figures that show the number of people making the dangerous journey trebled last year. There were more than 28,000 illegal crossings in 2021. GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White says government efforts to tackle the problem were ineffective.
The Home Secretary has vowed to tackle the Channel migrant crisis in 2022 by going after the people smugglers. But just 4 days into the new year, those organised criminal gangs don't appear to be getting Priti Patel's message, as the first migrants were taken here to Dover Harbour. 35 landed here by the Dover lifeboat just after 10:30 this morning. Border Force vessels are also involved in intercepting a number of other small boats.
Sir Keir Starmer has insisted Labour is a patriotic party and said if voted into government, he'd write a new chapter of its history. Speaking to local politicians in Birmingham, the Labour leader said he offered a new contract with the British people based on the principles he named of security, prosperity and respect. He also said his party would create 100,000 new start-up businesses and hubs of excellence. The Home Secretary says all historical convictions for gay sex will be pardoned. Priti Patel said more people would have convictions for same-sex sexual activity cleared as she expands the list of former offences in the pardoning scheme. It now includes any former crime involving consenting same-sex adults. Priti Patel says the government aims to right the wrongs of the past. A US judge is going to rule on whether a civil sex lawsuit can be brought against the Duke of York. Virginia Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew for alleged sexual assault when she was a teenager. But the Duke's legal team deny the allegations and will attempt to dismiss the case at a hearing later today. Well, yesterday, a development. A document was made public revealing the terms of a $500,000 payout from convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein to Miss Giuffre, which prevented her from speaking publicly.
Why does Andrew need this agreement if, as he says, he is innocent of all these charges? Now, it's not a good look using a 12-year-old agreement drawn up by a convicted sex offender, to try and get out of, answering the questions.
The founder of an American blood testing business has been convicted of fraud. The company, Theranos, had been valued at $9 billion after claiming it had revolutionary finger-prick blood testing technology that could identify disease. But it never worked. Billionaire Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 2 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. She could face 20 years in jail. And David Bowie's estate has sold his publishing rights in a multi-million-dollar deal. Warner Chappell Music has acquired access to 26 studio albums. The agreement covers hit songs like Let's Dance and Heroes, released during the British artist's 6-decade career. That is all your news for now. I'll have an update for you in half an hour. Right now, the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, children are heading back to school at last and the government plans to keep them there. I'll be talking with Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee, about how we protect pupils' education. Prices are going up and in April our energy bills could rocket and tax rises are due to start too. I'm talking with Conservative MP John Redwood about what the government could do to help us. If you're heading off on holiday, there may be some good news this week. I'm talking travel and tests with Conservative MP Henry Smith. And with a national housing shortage, some landlords are offering a free room for, shall we say, favours? We'll be talking to an investigative reporter and a member of the House of Lords working to clamp down on this revolting practice. Last year, children got ready to go back to school and then stayed stuck at home, learning online. The government is determined to keep kids in school this year, given the huge damage done during the pandemic. To discuss this, I'm joined by Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee and Conservative MP for Harlow. Robert, Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
There is going to be disruption if teachers get infected. Nobody wants it. It's just inevitable. The government are trying their best to mitigate that. Mask wearing in schools seems like a pretty small thing to do in order to keep kids in class.
Well, first thing I'd say, and it's important to do this, I give heartfelt thanks to all the teachers and support staff, not just in my constituency of Harlow, but also around the country, are doing everything possible to keep schools open, keep our children learning. Of course, things are very difficult. The one difference we have between now and last year is that most teachers and support staff will have been vaccinated. Many of them will have had the booster programme. Many children over the age of 12 have been vaccinated as well. So that gives staff and children more protection against the coronavirus. The government have put carbon monoxide filters in 99% of schools, which will measure ventilation and explain what is needed, what schools need. £100 million of funding has also been given to schools. There'll always be a need for more funding. I always campaign for more funding, but the government are doing what they can. And I support what the Secretary of State is trying to do in terms of keeping the schools open, even though I have reservations about children wearing masks.
The government have been accused of doing less well on the issue of air purifiers. They've announced that they'll provide 7,000 air purifiers in schools to increase ventilation. Number one, it's very last minute. And number two, there are 300,000 classrooms in England. It seems wholly inadequate.
Well, some schools, first of all, it's good that those 7,000 ventilation systems are going to schools. There's another 1,000 going to special needs schools and alternative schools, alternative provision schools. And what the Secretary of State has said is that they've supplied carbon dioxide machines to every school. They measure the ventilation system. If the ventilation systems aren't adequate, then they will give more ventilation to schools. What I'd like to see for the government, and I've called for this, is for them to have a database of almost every school in the country in the heart of the Department for Education, where there are problems. If teachers are away because of COVID, the government sets up a task force for those individual schools where they help them with the equipment they need, but also with supply teachers, because the key problem isn't just issues like ventilation, which is important, but also making sure that these schools have the teachers and support staff they need, and whether or not they may be able to either merge classrooms or share classrooms with nearby schools. I appreciate this causes enormous strain on teachers and support staff and the children. And it's not perfect, and it may not be able to be done everywhere, but it can be done in some places. And whatever happens, we've got to try and keep as many schools as possible open and keep our children learning.
The Labour Party say that if the government had prioritised the vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds over Christmas, that would have ensured that schools were more likely to remain open.
Well, the vaccine programme for children...
We're going to get
Yeah,
Robert. Robert, sorry, we lost you for a second. So, yes, I was just putting to you the point that Labour have made that 12 to 15-year-olds should have been prioritised for vaccines over the Christmas period.
Well, the vaccine programme has been going on for children since well before Christmas. There was an issue because, of course, the JCVI expressed reservations, but then the chief medical officer came out in favour of them. And of course, that took a bit of time, and it always takes these things time to implement. But we have a significant number. I think it's over 50% of over 12s who've now been vaccinated. Nothing is perfect. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're dealing with a variant. I'm not saying everything the government has done is right. I've called for the task force. I absolutely support the need for more funding. I want more support for supply teachers. I wish they'd done the volunteer army much earlier. I called for it over a year ago. But nevertheless, I think Nadeem Zahawi is taking every measure possible to try and keep our children learning in school. And that has to be the priority, because we've done enormous damage to children during lockdown in terms of their mental health, their educational attainment, and their life chances.
Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, January is often a tough month for family finances after Christmas, but it looks like April will be even worse. That's when the energy price cap is set to end, and national insurance goes up too, with inflation sending prices up fast. 2022 is looking expensive. A number of Conservative MPs are concerned and are calling on the government to think again about that rise. One of those is John Redwood, MP for Wokingham, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now. John, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, Gloria.
A perfect storm is looming as regards the cost of living. Why is the government increasing national insurance for us all in April?
I have no idea. I voted against it. I said at the time that I thought it was a very foolish thing to do. It will slow the economy too much. And as you said in your introduction, if they allow a general inflation to set in, and then in April you take more money out of people's pay packets and you give them a big hit on the gas bill to keep the home heated, it's not going to be very good news. It's squeezing people too much. I want us to be promoting greater prosperity. I want people to be better off. And we don't want the government making them worse off. There is no need to put that national insurance increase in. Indeed, I think if they put too many tax rises in, they'll end up with less tax revenue than if they go for growth and allow people to keep more money to spend.
Do you get the sense that they might think again about that national insurance tax rise, which after all was a breach of the manifesto promise?
Well, they better. I mean, it's against the manifesto, it's against economic common sense, and it's going to be very unpopular. Three extremely good reasons, government, to listen and think again. I live in hope. If I didn't, I would give up being an MP. One of the points about being an MP is to live in hope of something better and to campaign for it. And I don't think we want a very big tax hit on individuals or businesses this April. We're only just recovering from the dreadful impact of the pandemic measures that they put in. We need to get the economy to a much stronger position. And then, of course, it would generate the tax revenue they need anyway. It's the best way of getting more tax revenue, to grow the economy, let people keep more of their own incomes, and then they spend those incomes on goods and services, and that in turn generates more tax revenue, because if you spend a bit more money because you can afford to go out, the person running the restaurant then pays more tax.
I want to take you back to another promise made by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. This time they weren't Prime Minister, they weren't Secretary of State for Levelling Up. This was during the referendum when they were key figures in that Leave campaign. On the 30th of May 2016, in that referendum campaign, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove wrote a piece in the Sun newspaper promising to scrap VAT on household energy bills if Britain backed Brexit. Was that a lie?
Well, I hope not. Again, I live in hope. It's another one of the things on my wish list after getting rid of the national insurance proposed rise. And even more of a no-brainer for a government that wants to be super green. Why are we still charging VAT on lots of green measures like boiler controls and better insulation and draft excluder and so forth? Strip all that VAT off, government. If you want to promote people saving money on their energy bills, you need to make it cheaper to insulate better and have better controlled heating systems. So all these things would be reinforcing. I do think there's a tendency in the establishment, the civil service and the advisors of government to still want us to be linked to the EU in a very dramatic way. And because VAT is an EU tax, they feel they need to keep it in aspect as it was when we had to do it for EU purposes. I want to show that we're free of the EU by getting rid of VAT on the things where we don't want it. And green products and domestic energy are two prime candidates for showing we're independent and better off.
And when it comes to potentially cutting VAT on fuels, I suspect that your view is the majority view on the Conservative benches. You must all put these views to the Prime Minister. Does it fall on deaf ears?
Well, who knows? We'll find out come the budget, won't we? Or preferably before April, because the clock is ticking on all these things. And if come April, there's a big increase in electricity and gas bills and no reduction in the tax on those bills, the government's going to get even more of the blame. And if they compound that with taking people's money away in national insurance taxes, then the government deserves the blame for making people worse off. So please, government, listen. I will keep on saying it right up until the time when these bills hit people's doormats.
And council tax, rail fares, mortgage payments, food prices rising fastest in a decade. Are these some things that the government can control, or is this some of these things just what the market determines? Can the government intervene in things like council tax rises, rail fares and food prices to help cushion the blow of rising prices?
Well, of course, the government can interfere in everything, although it's not always wise to do so. And if there's an international market pressure making things are dearer. And then it's just a question of whether we as consumers pay out of our income direct or whether they knock some tax off us and offer a subsidy. And the latter is probably clumsier and dearer than some other method. That's why I'm saying the government needs to look at the overall balance between taxation and people's incomes and make sure it's not increasing the rates and the tax burden in a way that promotes growth to therefore make people better off and promote more revenue. The general inflation is a sign that the Bank of England went on printing money for too long. They've only just stopped printing money. I was all in favour of them printing lots of money to offset the pandemic closures, which were a huge shock to the economy. But I think they carried on doing it for a bit too long, so we're getting a bit too much inflation.
And when it comes to COVID, we expect a statement from the Health Secretary to Parliament tomorrow because they have to review those, some would say, quite minimal restrictions that we face, the work from home guidance, the mandatory mask wearing in enclosed public spaces. We shouldn't expect to see any changes from those tomorrow, should we?
Well, I think I have to say I hope we don't have any changes because I think the advisors are still wanting to change them for the worse. I of course, would like to get rid of them. I think we now need to trust people and businesses to run their own risks and run their own lives. You've just had a very interesting series of exchanges on schools, and I'm very pleased that at last a point I and others have been making for 2 years is that we need to control and clean air better in enclosed spaces. And I'm glad we're now taking that seriously. Because we do need to come together, we do need to go to school or to work, go to an office, go to a leisure establishment indoors. We need more normal life, and it would be safer if all those places have got really good air systems to extract dirty air and or to recycle air using ultraviolet and other cleaners so that it can be virus-free.
John Redwood, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you. Now, tomorrow, it's likely that the number of travel tests could be cut. Good news if you're heading off on holiday, possibly. More on that in a moment, but first, let's take a look at your weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello. It is cold out there, certainly compared to what we've been used to. A strong wind in places too, especially in the far northeast, and some wintry showers also. All courtesy of an area of low pressure up to the northeast. This weather front slowly pulling to the south, introducing the colder air. And as the isobars pinch together, very windy conditions, especially over Orkney and the far northeast of the mainland of Scotland. We have a yellow warning in place for that and for continued snow showers coming in across Scotland. mostly over the hills, but down to lower levels across parts of western Scotland and some wintry showers for Wales, Northern Ireland too. Much of the rest of England, dry and sunny, but staying dull and damp across the southeast, and temperatures falling away. Single figures, but add on that wind and it feels even colder. Still very windy this evening in the northeast. Still further wintry showers to come here. So again, likely to be icy on the roads across northeast Scotland through the night and into Wednesday morning. Some showers coming into the west as well. So the possibility of things being a little icy as temperatures drop down close to freezing in towns and cities, a little below in rural areas. So a cold start to Wednesday for sure. It could be icy, as I said. Still some showers coming into Wales, snow over the hills, rain at low levels, some wintry showers across northeast Scotland also. But for many, tomorrow's a dry and a bright day with sunny spells, and the winds will finally be easing down as well. So actually quite pleasant, although still on the chilly side. Temperatures back closer to average 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. And as I said, the winds will be a lot lighter by tomorrow afternoon. Those lighter winds, though, will allow the frost to take hold quite rapidly on Wednesday evening. It's going to be a cold night Wednesday night into Thursday. Behind me, there's some wet weather, which, as it hits the cold air, will bring some snow over the hills on Thursday. The outlook remaining pretty mixed with a continued risk of hill snow and icy mornings. Goodbye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And from Tuesday, the 4th of January, we are presenting
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, Omicron put paid to a good few Christmas holidays, but the requirements for going abroad are due for review this week. Could travel soon be a bit easier and cheaper? To discuss what might change, I'm delighted to be joined by Henry Smith, chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Future of Aviation and the Conservative MP for Crawley, which of course includes Gatwick Airport. Hi there, nice to see you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, Gloria.
So those PCR testing requirements, especially if you're travelling back to the UK, everything I read suggests that they look likely to remain. Give me some good news.
Well, I hope we do have some good news later this week. Tomorrow, we are expecting an announcement on the latest update on international travel regulations, which were increased at the beginning of December, of course, as a result of the Omicron variant. But really, all the data suggests that certainly with Omicron here and all around the world as the dominant variant, and the fact that it doesn't seem to be, fortunately, as of concern in terms of the pressure it's putting on health systems in the way that the Delta and previous variants were, that really we should be able to adjust the travel test requirements for those who are going international. The PCR test is very expensive. It takes a long time for those results to come back. And the result of that is that it has seriously continued the damage to our aviation and travel sectors, which in normal time employs around about 1.5 million people and is worth billions to the UK economy. It's a sector that has really been having rolling restrictions now for the best part of 2 years, and is the only part of the economy really with still quite draconian regulations on it. So it is time, I think, that we have a lighter touch to travel that both protects public health, but at the same time saves jobs in the travel and aviation sectors.
The government is treading cautiously. They say they're optimistic, but want to be cautious. And potentially, we're heading into a difficult 2 weeks, maybe the most difficult 2 weeks of this new variant. They need to wait and see. That would be their argument.
Well, I'm all for caution and I'm all for optimism as well. And I think that is perfectly in line with dropping the PCR requirement and going back to what we had before December. And that was a rapid antigen, a rapid flow test for travel. They are very reliable. In the event of a unsure result, that can always be backed up by a PCR, but in the vast majority of cases, they do protect public health for those crossing international boundaries, and is something that will give greater confidence for travel. What we have just seen is a second Christmas season after 2 lost summer seasons of international travel. And it's not just about people, spending some winter sun or in the summertime a couple of weeks by the pool. This is about this country being an island trading nation, a global trading nation. And it's about families who now for 2 Christmases in too many instances have been separated because of the uncertainty of international travel and the sheer cost. I mean, PCR tests are the best part of £100 per passenger, and 3 tests are required. There's a pre-departure test, there's a test within 2 days of coming back to the UK, and then a test within 2 days of being back in the UK. So it's 3 tests for each individual passenger at great expense and inconvenience. And really, that is just damaging confidence massively in people being able to travel. And the direct result of that is jobs continuing to be lost in the travel and aviation sectors and the other parts of the economy that tourism supports.
Henry, you're making a powerful argument. What I'm trying to work out is if you are still lobbying the government or if you've had a nod and a wink that we might get some good news tomorrow.
I haven't had any nods or winks, I'm sorry to say, and that's why I'm grateful for being on your show to continue to make the case through the media, through channels in Westminster, to make the case that actually, for the sake of the UK economy, for the sake of families who are separated, for the sake of jobs in the travel and aviation sectors, we used to have the 3rd largest aviation sector in the world before COVID. For the sake of all of that, we need to get back to some sort of normality, given the fact that we'll be living with variants of COVID probably for the foreseeable future, and we have to learn to live with that and not damage our economy as a result.
And you're right to say that those PCR tests are incredibly expensive, and I think they do make the difference between whether or not you choose to go on holiday. But there are other things that get in the way, aren't there? Passenger locator forms, really? Will we have them forevermore?
Well, I've travelled several times during the pandemic, and I find lateral flow tests, as we're all used to them now, reasonably straightforward. But PCR is certainly another level, and takes a lot longer for results to come back, much more expensive, more uncertain for those who are thinking of travelling. Passenger locator forms, if you get one little thing wrong on what is a relatively complex form, then that's it, you can't travel. So that puts people off booking in the first place. And I think this is the big problem. For those people who are booked and determined, they sort of push through. But for those people, particularly if you're travelling as a family of four, for example, it becomes very prohibitive. And the risk of getting stranded abroad if the test or the locator doesn't work. These are all things that lead people to think we just won't bother in the first place, and that's damaging our economy. It's damaging family relations, and we need to get back to some sort of normality. As we're all wearily aware, it's been almost 2 years now. Aviation and travel was one of the first sectors to be affected by the COVID pandemic. It's one of the last to recover, and as I say, really the only part of the economy now that still has quite draconian restrictions. So we need to get back to much more normal service. And I think that means a simplification of the requirements.
Henry Smith, we await the announcement, the review with bated breath. But thank you for your time today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
We'll have the latest on the migrant crisis next from our Home Affairs editor in Dover, and then I'll be talking about trouble for the Tories. Another poll says the public are not happy. But first, here's your news.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines at 12:30. At least 6 hospital trusts have declared critical incidents as Omicron cases threaten staff shortages. The Prime Minister says it's essential to look after the NHS, but some health leaders are warning they're in a state of crisis. 35 migrants attempting to cross the Channel to the UK this morning have been taken to Dover by the local lifeboats. More illegal vessels are also being intercepted by UK Border Force. It follows new figures that show the number of people making the dangerous journey trebled from last year. More than 28,000 illegal crossings took place in 2021. Sir Keir Starmer has defended Labour as a patriotic party and said if voted into government, he'd write a new chapter of its history. Speaking to local politicians in Birmingham, the Labour leader says he wants to start the new year by making a pledge of straight leadership. He also said his party would create 100,000 new start-up businesses and hubs of excellence. A US judge is going to rule on whether a civil sex lawsuit can be brought against the Duke of York. Virginia Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew for alleged sexual assault when she was a teenager. The Duke's legal team deny the allegations and they're going to attempt to dismiss the case at a hearing today. Yesterday, a development. A document was made public revealing the terms of a $500,000 payout from the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein to Miss Giuffre, which prevented her from speaking publicly. You are right up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with more on today's top stories at 1 o'clock.
I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And from Tuesday, the 4th of January, we are presenting
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Now, over 28,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats to reach British shores last year. That's triple the number that came in 2020, and as fears grow over potentially even higher numbers this year. The first boats have begun to land this morning. Our home and security editor, Mark White, is down in Dover today. Mark, the latest, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well, Gloria. Yeah, we're just 4 days into the new year and we're seeing the first of these small boats making it across the English Channel into UK waters, really taking advantage of a weather window. We've had some pretty appalling days over the Christmas and New Year period, but just today the weather has died down enough to allow these small boats to get off the beaches of northwestern France, and that's what they've done. 5 boats, we believe, have been intercepted so far, potentially others out there, but 5 we believe have been intercepted by Border Force and the Dover lifeboat, which took 35 migrants here to Dover Harbour around about 10:30 this morning, the first of the migrants to arrive in 2022. And the weather, as I say, is closing in now. I'm just looking behind me at some really ominous dark clouds that are coming in. So if there are still boats out there in the Channel at the moment, then they could be running into some significant difficulties as the wind is starting to pick up again as well. It's a small window. They've taken advantage of that, despite what we've heard from the Home Secretary Priti Patel about going after the people smugglers in 2022, determined, she says, to tackle the Channel migrant crisis. Well, those people smugglers certainly don't appear to be getting her message, or at least listening to her message, because they are still pushing these small boats out. As I say, the first of 2022 to arrive here at Dover Harbour at 10:30 this morning. 35 migrants. We're told that the Border Force vessel Hurricane has at least 90 migrants on board as well. That is currently mid-Channel and is due to come back to Dover within the next hour or so.
Mark White, as ever, thank you for the very comprehensive update. Thank you. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking in Birmingham this morning. He's had a good end to the year and today described the PM as a fundamentally unserious politician who behaves as if politics is, quote, a branch of the entertainment industry. Recent polls have been encouraging for Labour, though a poll last night sees the Prime Minister's approval rating beginning to bounce back up from a low of -30 to -18. An Ipsos Mori poll shows the public think the government are doing badly on almost everything other than vaccines. I'm delighted to be joined now by James Johnson, former number 10 pollster and co-founder of JL Partners. Hello, thank you for coming in today. So the polls look bad for the Prime Minister. How serious is it?
I think it's potentially very serious. I mean, we saw a real decline in the polling position for the Conservatives in December, largely because of that Christmas party story. We've seen a little bit of a recovery for Boris Johnson. The big question now is Boris Johnson able to recover from that really bad polling position in December? or has the horse bolted with the public? And I don't yet know the answer to that question. We need to do more research this January to find out. But that's really the thing that hangs in the balance. Is this a permanent brand poisoning, or is it something that he can bounce back from?
And do you think the demise is down to parties? Simple as that?
Yeah, so I think there was this sort of build-up of bad stories in the later end of 2021, whether it was issues over sleaze, whether it was the Owen Paterson case, whether it was just a general bad news around Boris Johnson. I saw voters noticing those things, but I didn't see voters changing their minds because of those things, largely because they said, well, all politicians are sleazy, not just Boris Johnson. The Christmas parties thing was unique because it not only was something that the Conservatives couldn't really turn around and say, well, look, Labour did it as well, but it also was very personal for voters. Everybody remembers that Christmas, right? Everybody remembers that December in 2020 where they couldn't go home or they couldn't see loved ones. So that particularly sort of cut through. Now, I think that there is sort of two things to say about that. One, if one event is really, really important, then on the one hand, it may be so important, a bit like the ERM crisis for John Major or other issues, Brexit for David Cameron, things that just poison a brand forever. On the other hand, it may mean that once it recedes from the news, Boris Johnson, the government in question, might recover. And that's really important, I think. And I don't see it being all of these other issues that were key. It was that one Christmas party's problem.
Cost of living is set to be, well, fingers crossed that we deal with COVID, but cost of living is set to dominate this year. Real squeeze on household incomes. That's serious, isn't it?
I think so, in that voters, if they feel that things are bad, they often feel less good about the government in question. And I've had a couple of people in focus groups already saying, yeah, I'm less likely to vote for the Conservatives because I'm feeling the squeeze more and they're not sorting out. However, I'd make two big warnings on this. The first is that the cost of living as an issue is something that voters don't necessarily turn around and blame on the government. Right. They actually feel that the pandemic has driven a lot of costs up, and they're very sort of aware that there are lots of other things going on here. They don't just see the government as adding to the pressure. The other thing about it is that the more conversation there is about the cost of living, the more conversation there is about the economy. And that is something where the Conservatives are more competitive against Labour on. They tend to have a lead on that issue. I know there was one poll that showed that they didn't recently, but broadly speaking, in other polls they do. So if the conversation becomes about who's best to manage the economy, that actually favours the Conservatives. It's a bit like in 2014, just before David Cameron won that election. Yeah. There was massive focus on the cost of living. Ed Miliband and Labour thought, here we go, you may remember it.
I know, I remember it well.
And then, of course, it actually became an economic question and voters went for David Cameron and George Osborne on that issue.
But one thing I don't remember during my time as a Labour MP, and the time that you're specifically referring to, I'm not sure that Labour ever had a lead on the economy. I may be wrong, but now there's a recent poll suggested that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, were most likely to be trusted on the economy, which I thought that could be a seismic moment.
Yeah, I'm sceptical about that because firstly, they haven't quite got a lead. They closed the lead on the Conservatives, so it was devil pegging. Secondly, it was at a really bad time for the Conservatives in the polls. It was in the wake of all of that sort of news storm. I expect that when that calms down, you'd see the Conservatives retake that lead. And in other polling, in the YouGov polling, actually that's barely unchanged, and the Conservatives still have a 10-point lead or so on the economy. Right. So I completely agree. If that shifts, then we really are in uncharted territory. But at the moment, I still see them retaining that edge.
When a politician loses their sheen, and my goodness, Boris Johnson had a lot of sheen, he was very attractive to huge numbers of voters. When you lose the sheen, can you get it back? Or once it's gone, is it gone for good?
You can get it back, and actually a great example of this is Boris Johnson. December of 2020, he was really in the doldrums. He had pretty bad approval ratings. A lot of MPs were saying we're going to have to get rid of him in 2021. Then we saw that vaccine rollout happen, and we saw his ratings recover, and the next thing we saw him winning Hartlepool from Labour in May. True. So Boris Johnson's proven that. The question is can something be so damaging that it changes the brand of a leader forever? And the big question is the Christmas parties that sort of moment? And some polls we can say yes it is, some we say actually maybe it's not quite that. I think we'll find that out in the next few weeks, and we'll certainly find it out by the time we come to those local elections in May.
Tell us about those local elections, because that's what really matters. We can talk about opinion polls a lot. In fact, it's and you would hope that we do, because it's the business that you're in. But real, actual votes. coming in May. What sort of seats are up for grabs? What would those sort of seats teach us?
So we'll be looking at some quite important seats in the sort of red wall areas that the Conservatives performed so well in 2019, and indeed quite well at the last time they were contested in 2018. Few bits over the south, but the key battleground will be London, and that's where all of those boroughs are up in terms of local votes, and they're going to be the key benchmarks. And also because that's where Westminster is, because that's where a lot of the media are, that will also inevitably be the focus. And the key boroughs to watch out for are Westminster, Wandsworth and Barnet. And
which are the only three that the Tories...
There's a few more, there's sort of Bexley and places like that, but
yes.
Those are the three real swing ones.
Right.
And actually, I remember from my time running the polling for Theresa May, because that was the last time those were contested in 2018, we really thought that if all of those were lost, then there was going to be a real problem. And actually, in the end, Theresa May actually gained Barnet, and she held on to Westminster and Wandsworth. If 1, 2, all 3 of those go, then I think we really can say for sure there is a real problem for Boris Johnson here, and there's certainly going to be a problem with a lot of angry MPs knocking on his door as well.
And when you talked about the fact that you were doing polling in number 10 for Theresa May, just give us a sense, because obviously the Prime Minister Boris Johnson will have somebody else doing that same polling. Give us a sense of how leaders deal with challenging news in those polls.
Yeah, it's never the most fun job to deliver that news, of course, and particularly when you're sort of writing a note being that this is your approval rating this month. I mean, it must be a very surreal thing to receive. I think leaders are, I think the best leaders are people who look at the polls and think, OK, not just we need to snap respond to this now, but actually how do we lead the public out of this, and how do we therefore have a strategy that is going to do that, not necessarily overnight, but is going to sort of set us on a course that will work in weeks, months, years' time. And I think that's the problem with Boris Johnson's operation at the moment, that they don't really have a strategy for how they're going to tell a story up to the next election.
Indeed.
Because Cameron and Osborne were in really difficult times at this point in their parliament. We've been in a situation like this before, but they always had a message to MPs and to the public saying, hold on, things are going to get better. I think that's currently what they're missing.
Yeah, indeed. Keir Starmer. So, should he have reasons to be cheerful? On the face of it, he should.
Yeah, the problem for Keir Starmer is that his advantage at the moment is coming from the Conservatives being seen to do badly.
Yeah.
He's yet to get that positive vision out there. Some good moves on tone in his speech this morning, but let's be realistic, a lot of voters aren't going to be tuning in, aren't going to be watching that. It's a slow journey now for Keir Starmer to create that view that he is different. And there are still real hesitations about Labour, on the economy, on immigration, on Keir Starmer's leadership itself. So, yes, he should be happy in that he's managed to suddenly look competitive. But are there signs that the people are really going to change their vote long-term and vote for Keir Starmer as the sort of new saviour? Does he feel like Tony Blair in the 90s? I can't see it yet.
James Johnson, always learn so much from you and from our conversations. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you. Now, housing is expensive, and some unscrupulous landlords are exploiting that in the worst way possible. They are offering free rooms, but nothing in life is ever free, of course, and there's a massive catch. They expect sexual favours in return. Joining me now is Susie Cohen, an undercover journalist with the Daily Mail. She's on the phone to preserve her anonymity. And I'm also joined via video link by Baroness Alicia Kennedy, director of the campaign group Generation Rent. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Susie, this is such a shocking story. Can you tell me how you first heard about this and why you started investigating?
So I first heard about it from Labour MP Peter Kyle, who has been campaigning on this issue for several years. And I started looking into it, and I was just horrified by what I found. It didn't take much digging around to, just one search on Craigslist brought up scores of pages of these really disturbing adverts. And from there, just sort of kept going with it. And, unfortunately, nothing has really changed since then. That was a year ago now. But it's absolutely horrifying when you first, I don't know if you've typed it in yourself, but there's just blatant exploitation in front of your eyes.
Tell me about how you conducted your undercover work.
So I went on Craigslist and contacted about 20 of these adverts, offering free rent for struggling students, or one of them was titled "Has COVID Stolen Your Future?" And really predatory language and very explicit, descriptions of what type of body they want their tenant to have. And I spoke to, like I say, about 20 people, and managed to get 3 of these to do a video chat with me. I had to jump through several hoops, endure really explicit messages, requests for photographs. I was posing as a 21-year-old student who'd lost their job due to COVID. And it was just, the predominantly older men with some just very vile language. And yes, eventually managed to speak to them on video chat. And that's where I got to understand the details of what they were expecting, which was explicit sort of sexual favors, massages, and other things. So yes, and then we exposed them through that. And one of them was investigated by the police, but I'm not sure how far that investigation got in the end.
What great journalism, Susie. Alicia Kennedy, you're a Labour peer in the House of Lords. You're also the Chief Executive of Generation Rent. Have you come across this?
Yes, we have, and it is thanks to the work of investigative journalists like Susie, and as Susie said, the hard campaigning work of Peter Kyle MP. And of course, for those of us in the housing world, it's not a new phenomena. In 2016, Shelter Research showed that 8% of women had been propositioned in this way to give sexual acts for free or discounted rent. And more recently, over the pandemic, between March 2020 and January 21, 300,000 women had been propositioned and asked for a sex for rent arrangement, the research has shown. So we really do feel that thanks to the work of journalists like Susie, that the criminal justice system needs to change, because the current law and act and guidance isn't adequate. As Susie said, only one person. Sorry, Gloria. I was just going to say, as Susie said, despite this being a current crime, only one person has ever been charged, and that was in January last year. And that was down to the work of investigative journalists like Susie, not down to the work of the law enforcement. So the current law and guidance is inadequate.
But it's illegal. So what more can Parliament do, Alicia Kennedy?
Yeah, well, we're asking Parliament, and this was debated in the Commons last year, but it's now coming up to be debated in the House of Lords. And Generation Rent and other organisations are asking the Lords to pass amendments which will allow the Commons and the government to take a second look at the issue and hopefully agree with it and bring forward legislation, because the current law means that women and victims need to define themselves as prostitutes to get access to justice. And of course, this is a huge deterrent. So the amendments are asking that a specific offence be created of offering sexual acts for free or discounted accommodation. And the second is about taking actions against website platforms. As Susie said, these adverts are free for all to see. They're open, they're explicit, and predators, not landlords, but predators, and these are what these individuals are, can freely advertise what they want to receive in return for free and discounted accommodation. They go unchecked, unmonitored, and ignored by law enforcement. So we want to see action taken against the website platforms that allow this to happen. Not all websites do, but as Susie said, Craigslist does, and they're a £7 billion organisation that we think should be able to take responsibility for not advertising this exploitation.
I am so shocked by this story. Susie, do you agree with Baroness Kennedy that the government could do more to stamp this out?
Absolutely. This act is not fit for purpose. And as Baroness Kennedy said just then, that there's been no prosecutions due to the work of police enforcement themselves. And Labour MP Peter Kyle, who, like I said, has done a lot on this, has tabled an amendment he tabled 2 amendments to the policing bill in May, which to make a specific, make sex for rent a specific crime. I'm going to make it easier to target both the perpetrator and the facilitator, such as the website. But this was rejected. So I think it's very much in need of updating. And I think what Baroness Kennedy is trying to do is fantastic, and fingers crossed that she's successful.
Certainly hope so. I'm going to keep Baroness Kennedy with me for one final question on the Labour Party. But Susie, I just want to say thank you to you for joining us and keep us up to date with the work you're doing. It's absolutely an astonishing story. Baroness Kennedy, while I have you, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has made a speech this morning setting out his vision. You were a senior party official during the last Labour government. How worried are you that this bounce in the polls that Labour has had is really due to government inadequacies rather than any Labour strength?
It is an expression of disappointment in the government, that is for sure. But what the poll surge has allowed, it has now given Labour opposition the space and the chance to prove to voters who are taking a second look around at the political parties, there needs now to be something for the voters to look at. So for the Labour opposition, if I was there, and I'm not because I'm with Generation Rent, that they now need to prove properly that they're credible, competent, and have the solutions for the country and for people's families. And as the director of Generation Rent, for us, that would be about insecure housing. People live in some of the most appalling housing conditions. They have high rents, they can be evicted without notice, they can be illegally evicted and enforcement isn't strong enough, and they live in overcrowded accommodation. And the temporary accommodation and the lack of social housing is an issue that we would want to see any future Labour government, and indeed the current government, put forward proper solutions to the housing crisis in this country. Levelling up needs to be a housing issue. There is no more fundamental right than having a safe, secure, decent place to live. And if Labour have solutions to that, we'll support it. If the government have solutions to that, we'll support it. And there's forthcoming legislation, hopefully from the government, which will allow the Labour opposition to prove that they have the solutions to the housing crisis and to the 30 million renters who live in this country.
30 million, wow. Baroness Kennedy, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria.
You have been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. It's good to be back. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. But for now, I'll leave you with your weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello. It is cold out there, certainly compared to what we've been used to. A strong wind in places too, especially in the far northeast, and some wintry showers also. All